Okay, I'm sat here today with Bud Paul Cadell, who's an ex-student at the University of Gloucestershire and friend, but also, importantly for us today, I think, a practicing Buddhist and have been for some time, which we might come to later. Now, Buddhism is, in a way that perhaps some people don't realise, quite a diverse tradition with many groups and schools of thought, things within it. So what kind of type, if that's the right term, of Buddhism have you come to practice over the years?
Right, thank you, Dave. The Buddhism I practice is a Japanese Buddhism, and it's specifically about the teachings of a 13th century Japanese monk called Nichiren. So you can say I practice Nichiren Buddhism.
Right. And so people say, okay, based on the 13th century Japanese monk from Nichiren, and how do his teachings stand out from what we might think of general Buddhist teachings, because it does share quite a lot of Buddhist teachings with many other groups. So what is it about it that it's distinctive enough to stand out?
Well, what initially attracted me about Nichiren Daishonin, well, I call him Nichiren Daishonin. The Daishonin is an honorific title, but he is known as Nichiren. So you'll have to forgive me if I fall into the Daishonin or Nichiren Daishonin side, because I'm so
Go ahead, yeah.
But what initially attracted me about him was the fact that it's very much based on everyday situations. You don't have to separate yourself from everyday life, go into the mountains or the forests, sit on your haunches and meditate for hours. It's really based on the situation you're in. You can realize Buddhism and Buddha nature through the everyday life that you're living. And the practice is very simple. In fact, he wrote saying many people might think this is a very shallow practice, but in actual fact it's very profound. And so it is accessible to anybody most people, I should say, it's accessible to most people who can just find time to devote themselves to what the practice entails.
And that, I can see the appeal of that very much and why that has an appeal. But you said there's a very simple practice and it's a very accessible practice. Could you say a tiny bit more about what the practice entails?
Yes, the main practice entails chanting. And the chanting of a phrase, and the phrase is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which Nichiren discovered through many, many years of study when he was trying to sort out the many hundreds, I believe thousands of Buddhist texts delving into what it is that the original Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, was actually trying to say by way of his enlightenment. And Nichiren came to the conclusion that the most profound teaching or sutra was the Lotus Sutra, and within the Lotus Sutra was this, what you can say, the simple aspect of devotion to the Lotus Sutra, which is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, in very basic English terms means I devote myself to the mystic law of cause and effect through sound, or it could be interpreted, I devote myself to the Lotus Sutra.
Absolutely, and I think it's worth pointing out that it's not that unusual in Japanese Buddhism, especially non-Zen Japanese Buddhism, to have a specific text that's the most venerated by a tradition.
Yes, yes.
So you did get in Japanese Buddhism competing sects or groups of Buddhism that had different texts as their key focus, although many of them venerated the Lotus Sutra, because it's particularly its concentration on what in, say, Pali Buddhism we often refer to as conditioned arising or codependent origination. But this idea of almost like an eternal law in Buddhism of causality being somehow fundamental or at the heart of Buddhist teachings.
Yes.
And I guess in Nichiren Buddhism there is, at least to some extent, an attempt to really pull that out, and I say that as everything else is secondary and this is what comes first.
Well, in Nichiren Buddhism, and this is what makes Nichiren a controversial figure within the history of Japanese Buddhism, is that there is an exclusivity about the Lotus Sutra in his Buddhism, insofar as that he believed that everything led to the Lotus Sutra. All other teachings are provisional and basically useless in comparison to the great truth that's found in the Lotus Sutra. And if you take it from the context of the time he was living, it's quite easy to understand why he was so exclusive, insofar as that he was living in a time of great disasters in Japan. There was famines and earthquakes and all sorts of natural disasters, and they were faced with the impending invasion of the Mongols under the rule of Kublai Khan. And so it was a very terrifying time to live in Japan, and he couldn't understand why Japan, being a Buddhist country, should be faced with such challenges, why people were going through such suffering. So he came to believe that because the Buddhism that they're practicing isn't correct, and so which necessitated many years of studying Buddhism, and then his conclusion that
he'd identified the correct form,
which he put down to be in the Lotus Sutra, and but then even so he divided the Lotus Sutra into essential, expedient, and then essential teachings, and it's from the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra which enabled him to realize his mission, which was to propagate Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, but propagate Nam-myoho Renge Kyo in a way of allowing people to understand their missions in life, which is to live the life as well as they can in the form that they're in, but also to realize I'm going to use the word karma now, the karmic role that they're playing.
So some sense of kind of meaning or purpose in their lives is kind of derivable.
Yes.
So my memory of the Lotus Sutra, and we'll get caught up talking about the Lotus Sutra for hours that we could, is it spends a very long chunk at the start telling you how great it is. Yes. And the Lotus Sutra believes most of the things that Nichiren believes about the Lotus Sutra, and you have to kind of wade through them telling you that all the Buddhists in history sat around reading the Lotus Sutra, and because of that they became Buddhists and things, which I always quite like, that self-referential starting point. But I don't want to talk to you about that, at least not today. The last thing I want to ask you about is the form in which Nichiren Buddhism has come to be most well known, certainly by many people in the West and elsewhere in the world, through this term, and I'll probably mispronounce it, Soka Gakkai.
Yeah. Right, the Soka Gakkai was an organisation that was formed by, just before the war, by a geography teacher called...
Which war? Sorry, for our younger...
Second World War. Second War, which... just before the Second World War, a geography teacher called Sunesaburo Makaguchi, who was very interested in the way people were taught geography in Japan, and decided that he would change things quite radically. I'm not quite sure of the theory as such that he came across. He was very much an educationalist person. But he took on board the teachings of Nichiren, and he became very much involved in trying to change the way education in Japan was propagated, away from, in very simple terms, away from the Shinto emperor worship idea to a more egalitarian, liberated form. As a result of which he was persecuted during the war, the Second World War, and he died in prison. But his immediate follower called Josei Toda, came out and decided that because of the trauma of the war, he would actually start up an organisation which main goal was to do with world peace, or as they call it in Buddhism, cause and rufu, the propagation of Buddhism as a cause whereabout the effect will become world peace. And he started what's known as the Soka Gakkai. Before that, it was an organisation to do with education, but Josei Toda really got the Soka Gakkai started.
So it's a real attempt to blend together this aspiration of peace with this causal mechanism that they believe, which comes from Nichiren Buddhism, but particularly kind of harnessed or articulated through Soka Gakkai, and so people see things like SGI, the Soka Gakkai International, or SGI UK for the British version. I think that's very interesting, and it gives, I think, at least an insight into kind of Buddhism, and makes us also realise that not all Japanese Buddhists are Zen Buddhists.
Indeed.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.